welcome to the show, Mystery Go and the Feral Monk. Today we've got Jeb Conner with us, and we're going to be talking about mythology. We're continuing our topics of a ginormous stature and nature, things that are way too complicated to try to encompass in a podcast, but we do it anyway, because that's what's up. I guess to kind of tie in, just basically on that kind of generic level, we've got important theorists in anthropology. And Jeb, I know that you studied some anthropology at UNCG.
Yeah, I did.
I did as well under Professor Andriata.
Yeah, that was my mentor.
I remember taking that class and telling her like that I was good friends with you and that you referred me.
Oh, that's super cool. That's super cool.
It was a very cool class. But yeah, just basically on that level of anthropology, the great thinkers and data gatherers are trying to come up with that kind of grand unifying theory. And Joseph Campbell comes to mind as being one of these pillars in the mythological community of studying it. And he had the monomyth theory, which is kind of like a rebranding of the collective unconscious that Carl Jung worked on, and along with Heinrich Zimmer, who I do not know a whole lot about, but I've recently discovered him, and I want to follow up on that. I feel like he's probably really important to this topic. But anyway, I'm going to kick it off with the Joseph Campbell quote, because I thought it was really, really fitting. He says that all myths are the creative products of the human psyche. Artists are a culture's myth makers, and that mythologies are a creative manifestation of humankind's universal need to explain psychological, social, cosmological, and spiritual realities.
So you can hit that up for us one more time? Give it a repeat.
Absolutely. All myths are the creative products of the human psyche. Artists are a culture's myth makers, and that mythologies are a creative manifestation of humankind's universal need to explain psychological, social, cosmological, and spiritual realities.
Yeah, so humans trying to create a story to explain the happenings around them, the rain, the weather, the sun,
Exactly.
all of these things. But
I think as well as to find means by which to inform those stories with archetypes that they can then emulate in those challenging moments that come with life, especially as a so to speak, sort of a wild human being living.
You turn up
nature.
the volume a couple thousand years, and the information society that we live in today, I think it really depends on your foundation that you subscribe to, whether it's a religion, whether it's atheism, like what is your foundation, and what do you need to explain your existence? Like for me, we're floating on a rock in space, and I'd say I border on like having like a Native American style God with atheism, somewhere in that limbo, But 25 years ago, I was reading James Redfield trying to see people's auras, and looking for the auras of trees, and and I don't know, maybe life got me jaded a bit, but it's hard. It's hard to get through the noise to see what's the actual,
I think too, we have sort of like two aspects of our life. One, a friend of mine, a French filmmaker, Sebastian. He's always saying, you know, that life is a good balance of science and poetry. So he also tends toward the atheistic view, but also like can appreciate the value in using story and literature and almost like dreamlike thinking. You know, it has some very like interesting qualities that are almost akin to like an unconscious or like a subconscious, you know,
Hmm.
something that would come out in dreams at night. And so for him, it's more of a poetry thing, and you know, for someone else, it can take on other meanings.
Right.
Yeah, right on, right on.
So why do you think, I guess, just basic questions like, why do we create myths? Why do you think they were invented? Um, and why do we draw upon them so much to hold our society together?
that's a, that's a good question. That's a good question. I don't know if you want me to take on that one. I don't know if I want to take on that one, but back to what we were saying earlier. It's like people want to explain their world, and whether it's fear of death, but we create belief systems to like give ourselves hope. I was talking to my wife earlier about, us having this conversation tonight. And I think a lot of your belief systems depends on whether you have kids. Do you fear death? If do you fear death more if you have kids? Therefore, do you need to create more of a belief system to like lessen that death anxiety? Or
Yeah,
if you're single, you're like, bring it on, like you
right.
can't come fast enough, But which is harder, like having a family and like having a family and knowing that you're going to leave them, and I talk less because or I talk quieter because my children are in the other room, and my 7-year-old's already like terrified that dad's going to die someday. But I think we create these myths and these stories as a way of like hope in the next life or lack thereof, or you know
Right.
it's
Absolutely.
I would
it's
offer that
hope, understanding.
uh, I would offer just as a possible uh, a different viewpoint would be in my mind I would see them more like emerging as a like the human being, say in a small group, say in the beginning of this whole like momentum of mythological thinking. You would have a tribe or a small group, and they would be confronted by the chaos of living in a wild environment, the violence of it, the uncertainty of it, the search for food, the need to construct shelter for yourself, and there would be sort of things that worked and things that didn't work over time. And you would need a way, especially if you're only living to 40 years old, you need a way to encapsulate uh, your experiences, the things that you learned, um, in a way that is easily remembered. And story is something that like touches us very deeply. It's something that we easily remember. We can attach a lot of fantasy and imagination to it, image the things really detailed in our mind's eye, and really incorporate them. And so I think more like instead of, I think the idea that we would create them as hope or as I think maybe it's not necessarily so, but sometimes I think that maybe that comes out of a little bit more of the modern uncertainty, because we're actually confronted with so many different possible ways of viewing the world. Whereas in those earlier times, they would have only known the one that they had from their own group. Life would have been a very clear cut, even if it wasn't a correct apprehension of the objective reality of their environment. It would still somehow be um, a means by which that they could interact with their environment successfully and pass that knowledge down to their other generations successfully. And so I think a lot of times I think they maybe didn't create it because they were scared of death or scared of violence to get away from that. But maybe more of the stories themselves were informed with basically moral behaviors. They were informed with a lot of, also with plants. I mean, the stories, I'm sure I would love actually for you to speak on, especially how indigenous peoples, they tend to have a very vast mythology about the different plants, and they would be in sort of the mind state that the plant has told them something or has informed them somehow, and it's because they're living in this very natural relationship to their environment that has taken on this narrative type of aspect. And so that lens that they're viewing the world through is very much informed by that without the benefit of objective science. And so I think some of those things are very interesting about mythological phenomena in human beings.
For sure. And I recently read Black Elk Speaks. Have you guys heard about this book or read about
I have a
this
copy.
book?
I have a copy.
Yeah, it's pretty magical, but there's a couple instances in the book where they a lot of them, as a young adult, you're forced to have a vision, kind of like you go off by yourself, 7-10 days, no food, and you fast, and you kind of you ask for a vision. But to what you said, Chad, like plants, in many instances, plants, like they have a vision of what the flower looks like, what the plant looks like, and just like, whether it's a sick child, like this plant calls to them, and they don't have like a pharmacopoeia that they're going through, but they have stories, traditional stories, to pass these stories from the grandfather to the grandson, and they know what season, and the seasons are all like the moon of the cherry fruit, and they know that that's like August or October, or the moon of the calf shedding, which is March or April. It's there. Back to your previous podcast about time, Native Americans have very little aspect of like a Gregorian time. Like there's no real time, there's no real watch, but there's many
just
stories,
the cycle of life. There's the cycle of the seasons and the birth, growth, and death of life around them.
Yeah. But yes, there's many stories about how plants just spoke to people and said, this is what I'm for.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I mean these peoples would be living completely immersed in their natural environment without those overlays of thought about nature being an object of like study, or an object that is not inhabited by consciousness. I mean, a lot of indigenous peoples tend to see consciousness as being something present in trees and rocks, mountains, entire forests collectively,
Yep.
as well as the individual trees within them. And so they wouldn't even have this idea of an objective reality testable by, our modern, it's sort of like our modern instruments and in heightened senses. They would have had their natural five senses and their intuitive, dreamlike language of something deeper in their mind. And while you were talking, I was thinking maybe it would be something like where I mean, wild animals themselves, they have a very instinctual knowledge of what plants they need to eat whenever they're sick, whenever they're having trouble with their digestion, or for certain nutrients at certain times of the year. And for them, it seems, at least from our perspective, I don't know how much it is, but it seems like it's very instinctual for them. And the human being at some point in its evolution took on this frontal lobe, this chattering, thinking mind that can deduce, and so maybe it was at that moment where the human being moved out of that more primal, instinctual, animal-like nature into this developed human brain that we now enjoy. Maybe that instrument, that instinctual instrument, the animals, has changed a little bit in quality whenever it
Yeah.
became human. And so it became this sort of, the plant did speak to you in a certain way, that there's an unconscious is recognizing certain patterns and certain things going around in your
Yeah,
environment.
for
And
sure.
and the myth of that plant is emerging inside your consciousness as this story,
Well, I don't know if you want to take a left turn, but I know we've talked before about Paul Stamets.
Yeah.
But when we talk about the Siberian land bridge and, the grazers, the ungulates that were coming across this bridge, and the hunter gatherers that were following them, they were definitely hunting them, but they were also eating mushrooms off of their dung. And so, I've seen or listened to Paul Stamets speak a couple of years ago, and he wanted to be on the record that, the frontal lobe, I don't quote me on this, but it quadrupled, 10,000 years ago, as these hunter gatherers are following these ungulates across the Siberian land bridge. We know that they were eating communally, and they're eating mushrooms, and they were talking about practical problems that needed solving. So when we talk about the frontal lobe like quadrupling in a very short time frame, it was the introduction of animal protein, possibly the introduction of hallucinogenic mushrooms, and practical problem solving.
Yeah.
But I think we can all say that we've eaten mushrooms before and have some pretty wild experiences. And I've never had a plant speak to me, but I wouldn't say that it's that far off of a
Well, that's
idea
the thing. I don't think the indigenous,
Sure.
the people in Hawaii that I knew, the Hawaiians, it's not that they thought of the plant as like having an audible voice, like a human voice that then told them it with language something. It's
yeah.
more of like, in the sense that, taking the mushroom and the effects that it has on you and the thoughts that it evokes in you while under the influence of it is in a way how it's talking to you or informing you.
It probably
And
could talk to you as well.
yeah. Well, I mean, in
hello,
that sense.
Chad. This is what you can use me for.
Oh Lord.
Yeah, but yeah, sorry, I didn't want to take a left turn, but it seemed like an easy plug on some.
Well, I mean, I would argue that every culture has had something. If it's in India, the Vedas and the Rishis, they had soma. The Greeks had ergot growing off of the wheat, and the whole mythology of Demeter and Persephone and
Salem witch trials.
and the
What was
sacred
that?
place there at Eleusis, and those are all super interesting mythologies that all do sort of that same thing. They're all confronting the challenges of life. They're all saying certain things about, or at least attempting to say certain things about life, and how to move morally with your behavior through that life, and how to deal with challenges and chaos as it arises naturally.
Yeah, and they create the mythologies, around these experiences. Mainly, like in Christianity, they created heaven and hell, try to keep you on the big river, But other cultures create, even Native American, they create stories about the scary goblin type creature to get you back in the big river.
Yeah. Sometimes
But
I think the symbology is even more complex than that. Jordan Peterson sort of draws a parallel, for example, in Christianity, just the whole sacrifice aspect of it, just being very, very in a practical sense that, that in order for you to really get to that point in your life where you can take on some type of embodiment of like a heroic life, for the good of yourself and others, that you're going to have to die to your old self. You're gonna have to sacrifice your old self to be reborn as a new self.
right.
And he goes a lot more into like the psychological symbology behind those things, especially in the vein of Jung and of Carl Jung.
Yes.
And so a lot of the utility that he draws on these stories is in that sense is
And
yeah. So as I was saying, just how Jordan Peterson tends to approach Christian literature as also archetypal mythology, and the kinds of parallels and the things that he can draw out of it is sort of like saying like sort of it's a compelling way to look at it, that you can really see a utility in it. You can see a lot of utility in these different stories. um, Even though I'm still of the opinion it's important, especially in today's very confusing age of limitless information, um, to get outside of that informed bubble, or that conditioned perception that our mythological stories, our religious stories, our histories, our uh, even our personal experiences and dislikes and all of these kinds of things, as we were talking about before before we started the podcast, it just sort of creates this amalgam um, of perception, of conditioned perception, that becomes sort of a form of identity. That story is a personal story, and you tend to take yourself to be that collective of stories and viewpoints and thoughts, and my experience tells me that itself is the body of thinking. And I'm very interested in moments when you mentioned way back in one of the beginning podcasts. I'm really interested in those moments where you tend to lose yourself, where you tend to, where the story stops or where it drops off, in a moment where you're highly engaged with a beautiful sunset on the peak of a mountain after you've hiked 8 hours all day next to pristine running streams, and it's not something that you're thinking, you're not contemplating, you're not, the inner dialogue ceases, the inner mythology ceases, all of those things subside, and sort of that very natural existence of just being yourself in that moment. I think those are very interesting, but I'm also interested
I love
in
that.
in
I
the
love those
stories of
times.
mythology. Yeah, those are the best moments.
Yeah, we've done, just out when I used to live in Northern California, we've done some good, 5, 6 day hikes, 60-mile hikes, and the goal is to get from point A to point B. You've got a 13-mile hike ahead of you, and there's no noise, just your heartbeat, your footsteps,
Yeah,
you know,
your breath.
your breath. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, I know some about Jordan Peterson, but is his background, he obviously was a Christian or studied, I don't know if what his background was, but is he now an atheist? I've seen some of him on Joe Rogan. I know
No,
he was in the
he's
hot seat for
actually
a minute over something.
yeah, he's been quite actually interesting in his development. He's very much like a Jungian oriented. He's a very big fan of Dostoevsky and these types of people. So he's done a lot of thinking about these kinds of things, and he's a clinical psychologist. So he's interested in all of
Okay.
these archetypes and stuff, because he has real people coming into his office who can't deal with the challenges of their life, and whose conditioned perceptual conglomerate of thinking that they identify themselves as being isn't equipped to deal with those challenges either. And so there's like a whole process. I imagine he uses a lot of insights from those stories
Yeah,
over
I've just seen him
time.
get really in the weeds about Adam and Eve and the apple and the serpent, and like it was her fault, and she's like, oh, it's his fault. And it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
it just seemed like he was going way in the weeds about,
Well, I think he wants to give it its due respect, because it's a literature that has developed from a time in human psychological development, and that it's rich with symbology. Like there are,
for sure.
you can have the stories have been refined over time. I mean, when you get to the point of like the New Testament, the mankind's at least in that region, mankind's journey of developing of those emerging mythologies that are helping them as peoples deal with the challenges of life have come to a point after redaction, especially the Old Testament, to all this redaction and refinement, and that they're super sharp in their symbologies and in their in the way that they're drawn together to represent something like Jesus could be seen mythologically to represent something like an ideal, like I think Jordan Peterson often he says this: if you took all of the heroes of the past, all of the really great men, all of the Gandhis and all of these people, and you were to extrapolate their best quality, and then you were to take all of those various extrapolated qualities, and you were to somehow try to find a way to create a character, an embodiment of all those extrapolated best qualities, then you would have something like that. You would have something like the ultimate hero. And then it's just that which makes then Jesus' story very interesting, because it's not the typical hero story that would be violent or that would overthrow something. It's actually something that's more cooperative and gentle, and so it's an interesting moment of where you could say the emergent mythologies didn't need to be as harsh, because the reality itself had become less harsh. There was more civilization. I mean, even if the Romans were there and they were oppressing the Jewish people, there were aqueducts, there were streets and things. The Jewish people had developed over such a long period of time, from time whenever Egyptian was the high society, through all of the subsequent empires, even from Cyrus the Great and the Babylonian exile. So there's like a rich history to draw on symbolically, and I think a lot of times that's kind of what he's talking about. It's almost like a meta hero. You know, you've got all of these different hero stories in that culture, and you get to the point of Jesus, and it's almost like a meta hero, something extrapolated from all the best of all that came before it. And so that he spends a lot of time with that. The Orthodox Christians love him for it, but I think it's possible to do that with any mythology. I think it's easier, say, for the Western mind to dissect either Judaism or Christianity, but for any other culture and their own cultural stories, I'm 100% behind. Hey, look into your own stuff. There's some rich symbology there that's maybe kind of gotten forgotten in this modern age. And so
one, I know we did talk about him, you and I chatted a couple weeks ago, but the one thing that I heard him say recently, just the burden of consciousness, you know, where you're constantly future planning. You're constantly future planning. But the problem
constantly
with
aware.
Planning,
constantly solving problems.
But it hinders your present. You know, you're not present because you're future planning, and it may prolong your life 30 years because you're gathering nuts and, you know, planning and preventing disease and whatever you're doing, but you're not present in your day to day, you know? And before you know it, 10 years have passed and here we are, you know? But that was something I when I heard him say that resonates, especially when you have young kids, for me, you know?
It's hard to find the contemplative time in life, but I think that there's a certain benefit to starting off with some type of very direct seeing type of meditative exercise to develop that ability to be aware of all these stories going on inside of you that are leading you emotionally and leading you towards decisions and towards desires and things that maybe are causing more unnecessary suffering for yourself than needs to be. And I think there's a value sort of in that. So, but I enjoy all of the stories that are around, but and the possibility of endless interpretation and all of those kinds of things. But
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
really like is getting out of that story, because it's very linguistic. It's like a constant chatter, you know. That's the burden of consciousness. is that is that thing that just keeps on talking about everything, and most of it is bullshit and, and
yeah,
stupid and a waste of time, you know. It's nice. Nature can pull us into those moments, but I think we can also consciously choose to develop that skill.
Not to
yeah,
attach to it.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing, speaking of nature, I know we were on we wanted to kind of dig in deep to mythology, but one thing I wanted to just drop here was in my past life and work, we talk a lot about nature deficit disorder, and that's definitely something that's, I don't know if that term is on your radar, but that's definitely something that modern humans are experiencing, well, whether they know it or not, is we tend to forget in our day to day that we're animals. We need fresh air, we need nature, and it's something that therapists, psychologists are starting to, it's recognized as an actual disorder, nature deficit disorder.
Yeah, I know
It's
there's
just,
like adventure therapy. No, it's a pretty
yeah,
popular thing. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, we just,
I see it being, yeah, totally something that could be um occurring. I mean, it makes sense. We've gotten so technological, and it's especially dangerous during times like these with COVID, where you're forced to pretty much stay inside.
yeah, for sure. You watch, like, you read a lot about the increase in suicide rates,
Yeah,
for young kids, Japan, around the world. Suicide rates are definitely up. People are trapped inside, and but then on the flip side, you have this, like, it's since I've moved, we just, I don't think we said this while we were been on this call, but I recently moved from California to Denmark, and I've been here about 50 days. But it's really like, you it's a different, if it's a different world in Scandinavia, and I know it is in Zurich where Chad is, but just not having that consumerism, like, beat on you. There's no, like, Amazon delivery trucks up and down the block. Like, there is no Amazon. Like, they protect local e-commerce. But I forget where I was going with that, but the consumerism. Yeah, what I was going to say is, like, if now that COVID is happening, people are at home, they're in front of their television, they're getting messaged by whether it's political, whether it's you know
yeah,
buy this, buy that. Like, I really, I strongly feel, and I've kind of said this for the past 4 or 5 years, but I really feel like this is where evolution is happening again. It's always happening, but I feel like there's something happening right now where you can continue to be human, Homo sapien, be in the woods, know what it's like to be a human, or you become a human consumer. You spend more time at home, you're fed your politics, you're fed your food, you know, your boxed food, and and you become a product of the system. You
Mm,
need medical support because you feed everything that you're given, whether it's news or food, you know
yeah.
and I feel like, back to nature deficit disorder, like, you got to get in the woods and you got to stay human. You got to take care of your spirit, mind, your physical body, and you know
yeah. I
or
think that's a great example of, using mythology in a positive way to evolve. You know, I want to segue that with, I've been working on a screenplay on Robert F. Williams, and he's a famous civil rights leader from North Carolina, and he's known for his armed self-defense stance, which was pretty opposing to Martin Luther King's pacifist and Gandhian approach. But Robert F. Williams, I read about him extensively, and one of the things that he mentioned I found interesting that I could relate to this topic was he didn't understand why George Washington, who was known as this great American hero, could take up arms against tyranny, and protect his home, and go off to war, and then and come back, and then go back to Mount Vernon and lead this peaceful existence out. Just became like this kind of myth and American ideal. And I think that he used it, as a minority in the community that was oppressed by the KKK, just as somewhat of an inspiration. And I think that's pretty important and relevant.
What's the timeline on that, Matt?
We're talking the script I'm writing is taking place in 1961.
Right now, so you got a couple of years, maybe.
Say what now?
It might be a couple of years before it takes total shape.
Oh, my script.
Your script and
I've it's been a long journey, and I'm going to complete like basically a 30-minute draft, a 30-page draft, which will equate to like a pilot episode, to be able to, because I want to produce it myself and film that, because that seems like a realistic venture to undertake.
Yeah, where in North Carolina
And
did
then
you
if I send it off and it does well, then maybe we'll turn it into something more. It's in Monroe, North Carolina, which is outside of Charlotte on the South Carolina border.
Okay.
So it's a
Cool.
super good example, actually, because that's exactly an example of a myth emerging into the culture now, and then down the road being used to inform the moral behavior of somebody in that culture.
Yeah, and it's going to be necessary in that neck of the woods too.
Yeah. I don't think I could do an episode of this podcast without mentioning Star Wars, because Star Wars,
the great modern mythology,
is such
at least for our generation.
Yeah, it's such an important piece of me in my formative years growing up, and learning, of course, after that George Lucas was a student of Joseph Campbell, kind of brings it all full circle to me. But yeah, it's all gleaned on from different mythologies, and it's just a beautiful work of art.
I didn't really have like, I had an epiphany when I was in college at UNCG, and I took a German film class, and my professor, his name is Jeffrey Adams, actually. And
Okay.
so we studied American History X, but we also studied like Leni Riefenstahl, a lot of the Nazi propaganda films.
Mhm.
But we went into Star Wars, and at first, like I didn't know where this was going to go. But when you look at like the stormtroopers, and the Hitler Youth, and they all look the same, they talk the same, and then you get into the Imperial stormtroopers and the Emperor, and then like I think Yoda's Buddha for sure.
Right.
He even sounds like Dalai Lama.
Mm.
But yeah, man, it's like
the Jedi are samurai,
Yeah,
dude, I didn't get it until that class. And side note, when I lived in Northern California, we would always go hiking. We had to go through Lucas Valley Road, and it was George Lucas lives out
So
in like close to Point Reyes,
yeah,
and Petaluma, and he's just got all this land out there, and you can definitely see where like they filmed Return of the Jedi and like the scenes with the Ewoks. I don't know exactly, but
right.
definitely in the redwood somewhere in Northern California. But it's pretty killer.
Mm.
But yeah, I had no idea of the global, German perspective of Star Wars.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a
But
far-reaching film. Yeah.
I think the one that's probably most poignant for like right now is, or at least from the last little while, is The Matrix, just because of our whole like
Mhm.
computer world. That's also
Yeah.
kind of an interesting mythology that's emerged out of the culture.
Yeah, the blue and the red pill. I mean, it's huge. Everyone knows what that is.
yeah, take your Homo sapien pill or your consumer pill.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a long time. And back to Star Wars, I haven't seen any of the Star Wars outside of
Me
the
neither.
originals.
Oh, well, don't,
Bad to say.
don't ruin it. They're bad. They're never gonna
Yeah, they're terrible.
retain that magic that they first had. And I mean, there's flaws in the first three, episode 4, 5, and 6, but that's why they're beautiful. Like it's analog versus digital. It's human versus computer. And
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of what Star Wars' mythology is really all about. Is you know Darth Vader becoming the machine, and then where are you able to find your salvation or redemption after losing yourself, like to the machine,
Yeah, yeah.
becoming the computer.
Well,
Yeah. Lessons to learn.
yeah, you can. I mean, that's the thing. Modern professors of mythology could probably do a pretty interesting archetypal deep dive on something like Star Wars. Or
Yeah,
I think more so than like Star Trek, because Star Trek was such a long running series. There's just too many episodes. There's just too much.
It was more of a
length.
contemporary. It dealt with contemporary issues, and it holds its own place. But yeah, Star Wars is more of a timeless,
Deeply mythological.
a long time ago, man, in a galaxy far, far away. But it's right here. It's relevant. It's so human, and
Yeah.
you can all relate to it.
Mm.
So yeah, I think that's a good little bookend on that episode. I failed to mention at the beginning that we're coming at you from 3 different countries today, and Mr. Conner is a new resident of Copenhagen, Denmark, and of course Mr. Monk is still repping Zurich, Switzerland, and I'm over here across the Atlantic in Greensboro, North Carolina. So yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed themselves today. Thank you again for taking your time and joining me, Jeb. And
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt.
yeah, tell the family I said hello, and
I will indeed.
we'll catch up again soon. Mr. Monk, any last words?
I appreciate y'all. Y'all have a good night.
All right.
Yeah.
One love.
Good to see you both.
All right.
I'll see you soon. All right.
All right. Everybody be
Peace.
safe and be kind to yourselves.
Yeah. You too, brother. All right. Later, boys.